Good afternoon. Welcome to the second open forum session where you get to ask questions of our team of subject matter experts. Yesterday, we received 41 questions and recommendations on such diverse topics as the Inform Borrower Tool, the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, FSA, and the PPO portal. We plan to provide responses to the open forum unanswered questions on the conference website within 30 days. I am pleased to introduce our panel of subject matter experts, starting from my far left, Misty Parkinson, FSA Customer Engagement. Craig Munier, FSA Policy Liaison and Implementation. Thank you. Cynthia Hammond, FSA Policy Liaison and Implementation. Annmarie Weisman, Department, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Greg Martin, Department, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Pam Eliadis, FSA Business Operation. And last but certainly not least, Ingrid Valentine, FSA Program Compliance. So with those introductions, let's get started, starting with mic 3. Sir?
Hi, I didn't sign up to be the first one. Sorry, everybody. I just walked up. So question / suggestion. So Misty's team is obviously very busy being a team of superheroes. Thank you so much for everything that you guys do because it's really helpful. The concern or suggestion I have is once there's a FAFSA on file and inevitably they're selected for verification, the suggested texts that you all provide, there's a significant drop-off of quality, right? It seems like the effort for the FAFSA or like the mobile options, it's really there, and the suggested texts are not as good. So I'm not sure whose purview that falls under, but I'd love to see improved suggested text for the verification forms or all of the verification things. We end up just creating our own. I'm responsible for our 84 forms that we use. And me and my team, we do a great job, but any help that you all can provide us, it's a little bit better, would go a long way.
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Are you asking us to be more prescriptive in suggested text? Or I think what we currently do is to try to provide suggested checks that we believe would satisfy statutory and regulatory requirements, but without restraining you beyond what's minimally necessary?
Sure. I think that the text that you currently provide, the readability of these things requires a reader's ability to read at a very high level.
I see what you're saying.
Right? And we have to deal with students who are under stress. So even if they're excellent readers, because they're under stress, they don't read as well. Okay. And so we have to kind of make it more digestible.
You're looking for more plain language kind of a...
That would be great.
Yeah, no, I get that. That's a good idea. We'll take that back. Yeah.
Or strap that on, however that works.
No, thank you. That's a good suggestion.
Thank you. Mic 1, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I wrote down what I wanted to say to make sure we got it straight. This is about, I love the term verification melt. For our homeless and dependency override student files, these students meet with FA officers. We correct the rejected files that we initially get without parent information. We send them off with that correction, and they invariably come back as verified. So verification for these students, the most vulnerable, at-risk students, I'm not really getting. And can we look at that for homeless and dependency override students?
Thank you for that. So to the extent that you've gone to the work that you've already gone to for those people, do you find that there's more administrative effort remaining for you to do that you haven't already done in submitting the change?
Oh yeah, when the files come back for verification, these students, a lot of times they don't have an address. So doing the 4506T is really hard. They don't carry documents for 2 years. They're homeless, or they're living, with a different person than their family in dependency override situations.
Okay.
And so it's really difficult for them.
Got it. Somebody's taken that down. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, mic 2, ma'am.
Thank you. I may not be popular with some people with regarding to this, but I feel that and I brought it up previously in other sessions, previous years. I think it would be a very good idea, good business practice, to require parents who are taking out the Parent Plus loan to go through the process of an entrance counseling. Then they don't have that many questions afterwards. They don't go into shock when they have to repay. I explain things. I give out the pamphlets that the department no longer publishes. I got them all in my boxes in my office in case you need a couple. I did. I went crazy and ordered a bunch of them, so they're all there. But nevertheless, if they do entrance counseling, they have to stop and think another moment. And it's wise to do that because they're going to go on and retire, and you cannot borrow as a senior citizen for your retirement. So therefore, you have to be a little savvy with your money at this time of your life. So do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, having parents better understand how much they're taking out for their children and what their repayment obligations are is an excellent idea, which is one of the reasons why we are going to require parents as well to do the informed borrower tool.
Thank you.
They are going to recognize how much debt they have total,
Thank you.
including all children and their own debt if they still have school debt as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Mic 3, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Eunice Powell, and I'm with NASFA, and I have a few questions. First of all, has the name FAFSA on the web been eliminated and substituted with FAFSA.gov?
So we do still have some language that refers to FAFSA on the web, but I think primarily you will see that we have switched over to FAFSA.gov.
Okay, so schools and all consumer information should now be FAFSA.gov?
I think it can be whatever you'd like it to be. I mean, we were making the switch from FAFSA on the web to FAFSA.gov before we created the mobile app. So there are still multiple versions of the FAFSA. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, FAFSA.gov is the URL. Mm-hmm. FAFSA.gov makes it clear that it's a web product, but there is more than one electronic version of the FAFSA. So I think, whatever language I'd say there's nothing that's been trademarked, right? So whatever you need to say in order to be clear where you're directing people, and feel free to be directing people to the mobile app because that's awesome.
Okay, great. And then lastly, you mentioned this morning Children of Fallen Heroes and the school indicator on FSA, and I was wondering, is that going to be a rollover? Since you will now have that information, will the department be able to roll that over annually so that the school will know that that is a student who's eligible, or if it's a transfer student, that's a student who's eligible and does not have to self-identify or provide any documentation?
Yes, so if they were previously reported in the COD system, I believe they would have to be reported again in the CPS, but once they're reported in the CPS, then that information will roll over to subsequent cycles.
That was a change that we weren't able to implement the first year of Children of Fallen Heroes, but we wanted to do that. We thought it was important that once a school makes a determination that all schools be able to benefit from that and not have to have the student document again and again when they transfer for each school, that the tragic circumstances of qualifying for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mic 2, sir.
When Congress implemented the simplified needs test and automatic zero EFC based on 1040A and 1040EZ, it was not a letter of the law. It was rather an approximation to prevent people from artificially appearing to be low income when they were actually high income. And so when Congress changed in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts of 2017 to the new Schedule 1, you don't have to be the letter of the law. And so one of the problems that is that you need to add another exception for the penalty for early withdrawal from a savings account. I've had plenty of parents who are extremely low income who have lost the simplified needs test or auto zero FC simply because they cashed in a CD and had to pay $10 of interest on that CD, which shows up on Schedule 1. So I'd urge you to consider adding an additional exception for that.
Thank you for that. We thought we had captured everything from the 1040A that had moved to the original Schedule 1, and we'll take that back and take a look at that, Mark. But the other thing is we were also mindful of the fact that, as you've pointed out, that the whole purpose of this was to provide a simple FAFSA experience, the application experience, and we wanted to be careful that we were mindful that in trying to come up with a proxy solution that we didn't create more complexity than we were saving people. So we'll take that back. That's an interesting point. I don't have tax forms in front of me to validate what you're saying, but we'll take it back and look at it.
Right. Also, the asset protection allowance is on its way to going completely away. It's $9,400 this year for age 65 and above. And if it continues at the same rate, it's going to disappear entirely in 1 or 2 more years. Now, while that saves us a question on the FAFSA, no longer have to ask the age of the older parent, it still is problematic that parents will now feel that there's no longer any shelter for, and it was originally termed in the Higher Education Act as college savings sheltering. So I'm wondering what the Department of Education is proposing to Congress do to change that.
Well, let me speak to that. First of all, as you know, that's in the statute, in the needs analysis formula that Congress sets. And the Educational Savings and Asset Protection Allowance serves a very narrow purpose, and I didn't fully appreciate this till I came to work at the department. And that purpose is to identify, based on projections of both inflation, average life expectancy in the United States, and Social Security payouts for retirees and retiree spouses at age 65, an approximation of the amount of savings necessary that at age 65 would purchase an annuity, the income from which would fill whatever gap may exist between Social Security retirement income and what the Department of Labor, I think it is, that determines is a modest standard of living threshold. Mm-hmm. The good news is, if what you say comes to pass, it is because Social Security would be increasing, life expectancy would be what it is, and the gap, the amount of money necessary to fill the gap would no longer exist. I mean, basically,
the assumptions in the statute are completely disconnected from reality in terms of the assumed inflation rate, commission rate, growth rate, and all that.
But as you note, it is in the statute.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. No, I think theoretically what you're saying is true, is possible that the Educational Savings Asset Protection Allowance, all things being considered, but what we've really seen in the last 3 years is an accelerated increase in Social Security benefit payout and relatively low inflation rate, and that has narrowed that gap, and that's what you see reflected in that
and
asset.
If you go by the statutory language, it should go negative.
That could be. I don't know that, but your point's well taken. Theoretically, it's possible, but time will tell whether inflation and Social Security payout continues on the current paths.
Thank you. Mic 1, sir.
Thanks. My name's Tyler Pruitt. I'm from Samuel Merritt University. Yesterday, I heard regarding the informed borrower tool that it was going to be implemented for all the first disbursements after April for both award years. Was that?
It's for the 2021 award year.
It's just, okay, so just 2021. Perfect, thanks.
Sure.
Mic 3, ma'am.
My name is Katie Starling. I'm from Kansas State University, and this question is from a colleague in my office. It's the first time that someone's actually said, hey, ask them at SFA. She's our loan coordinator, and she said that whenever someone applies for a PLUS loan on studentloans.gov, whatever they enter updates the student's info on COD, overrides whatever's there. And she just had one the day before that I left, actually another one. So in this example, parent fills out the PLUS loan application, entered the social security number wrong for their student by 1 digit, which just happened to correlate to an actual student, and then in COD, that other student had their name and date of birth and everything changed to our student's information because that parent had put the wrong social security number in. And she said that whenever someone applies for a PLUS loan on studentloans.gov, it will overwrite whatever is on COD. So that was, were you already aware, or is there anything?
So I think what you're asking for is for us to take a look at putting in some sort of edit or something that will help eliminate an override. So maybe, are you sure question, or is this the student you're trying to update, or is this the loan you're trying to update, or something along those lines?
Yeah, but it could be, and I don't have specific examples, but it could be a student applying incorrectly for their Parent Plus loan, or just whatever is entered on the application on studentloans.gov appears to override whatever already exists, whatever record is in COD. It takes the new information, and that's considered the new good information.
So we can take that back to see if we can make it a little easier for folks to understand what might be happening when
Okay, thank you.
Mic 2, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Angie Leckington. I'm from Grand Canyon Education. This question was brought up last year, but I wanted to bring it up again. We have a student that's in the military and he was deployed, and there are no notaries on his base. So have you given any further consideration into doing electronic notaries?
We have, from time to time, have had policy conversations about that, and quite honestly, there didn't seem to be enough need for that or enough demand to warrant the work that would be necessary to flesh that all out. But we can take that back. I must admit, I don't know much about military deployment and what services are available to military men and women while deployed in that regard. So we'll take that back. That's an interesting question. Well, we're willing to revisit it. We have looked at it. There are companies out there that provide that kind of service, and we had some conversations with them about a year back, I think. So, thanks.
Mic 1, sir.
All right, Tarek Boyd from Morehouse. Question related to the Parent Plus application, and just wanted to know if there was a way that you could add a check to where anyone can't just apply for their Parent Plus loan. We have situations where students themselves actually apply for their Parent Plus loan. So we have the student borrower, then we have the parent borrower, and the information is exact to the student, and the application still goes through and they get an approval. And we don't catch it until we review it and we notice that they're not the same and they're not the parent, they're actually the student. So just wanted to know if there was a way to prevent the application from going through if a student applies for their own Parent Plus loan. Because at that point, the student thinks that they're good because it's been approved until the school comes back and delivers the bad information.
Yeah, thank you. This is actually an issue that we have been discussing at the department and looking at how better to make it very clear who is eligible to apply for a Parent Plus loan. And we have been looking at a very simple, plain language way to get that information on the application and make it very clear that, that you can't be the student, that you have to be the parent, what parent it would be, and that sort of thing. So thank you, and we are working on it.
Okay, thanks.
Mic 3, sir.
Yeah, John Falleroni, Duquesne University. I'm sure some of the panel knows me already. But I'm also PASFA, Government Relations Committee. I am involved with that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. I've been lucky enough to go down to DC and meet with legislators, meet with people from the department, met with David Bergeron, but met with Jeff Appel. And he's one of those people that was very modest, very smart. You knew he was the smartest guy in the room when you met him, but he never let on that he was the smartest guy, and he listened to us. And like I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least say I was very lucky to meet him, and I can imagine what a loss it is for you guys. It's a loss for all of us. Now that I've gotten through that, I'll go on with my pedantic financial aid rant. I know I've said it before, and I know a lot of people have come up with the studentloans.gov, but I absolutely cringe when it says Parent Plus loans apply for the max. I hear people in the office just say, you know, oh, don't worry about it, just apply for the max. And I just cringe. I think if we had an amount, if we had some sort of forecaster to say what this loan would be after fees, I think you'd see some borrowing go down. Just my thoughts. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as Cynthia mentioned, the Parent Plus borrowers will also be using the Informed Borrower tool shortly. They will see exactly what the expected, what their balances are and what their expected payments would be in the future. So hopefully that will help educate the parents as well.
Just like beforehand, you know what I mean? Just that thought of, this is what I'm borrowing, you know? It gets it in there. So just a thought.
Mic 2, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Joan Sanders from Northern Virginia Community College. What's the possibility of our getting the IP address on the FAFSA? And you may be wondering why. That is a factor that we use for fraud prevention, which is huge. And when we don't have access to it, we have no way to prevent that piece of possible fraud.
Joan, I want to make sure I understand. Are you saying tracking the IP address from which the person is making the FAFSA?
The filing.
Filing the FAFSA? We do some of that, because I know we've had some entities where they help large numbers of students complete the FAFSA in their office. In fact, and we had some issues where they couldn't, because they were submitting such a high volume from that one IP address, that was creating some problems. And they reached out to me, and somebody here.
I think you probably have the availability, but you don't make it available to us in the field. And that's what we need if we're going to help with the fraud prevention.
As to those IP addresses?
Correct.
What those are? Oh, okay.
Especially when we find a series of
I see what you're saying.
maybe stolen IDs that are all coming from the same IP address.
All right, so you're asking that we consider making more public, or making public our
Put it on the
at-risk IP addresses or suspect IP addresses. We'll take that back. I think there's probably some issues with that, but.
I have another request. This morning, Ed made mention of the fact that we are at a 22% verification rate. And my feelings about averages are kind of like, and I shared this with somebody this morning, is having one foot in hell on the other on a chunk of ice, and on the average, you're pretty comfortable. So we've got community colleges, which we know have a much higher than 22% selection rate. Is it possible for you to give us those percentages based on college type? I think that would help tremendously, because the 22% doesn't make any sense to us at a community college. Ed, I guess that was for you.
Yeah, we'll take that back and look at it. I mean, as we've said, and I'll channel my friend Jeff Baker, you know, that we select verification and heavily overly verified on Pell Grant recipients, and as you've noted, and as you know, Joan, those students are not evenly distributed across all sectors of higher education, so that's what it would reflect, but is where the Pell Grant students are enrolled. But your point's well taken. And we're not trying to be, by the way, just speaking for Ed and myself, no one's trying to be deceptive about when we talk about 22% overall verification selection rate. You'll recall when we tried to limit to 30%, back in 2017-18, you all reminded us that at some institutions that 30% was 80%. So,
correct.
No, your point's well taken, but you also know that we verify where the dollars are. So.
Yes, we understand. It would just be nice to have that correlation between what's reality and that percentage rate.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Point well taken.
Mic 1, sir.
Yes, Robert Muhammad, Winston-Salem State University. Has any consideration been given to having verification done once over a 4-year period versus every year, especially with students who we're forcing to verify or prove that they are indeed poor students. We do it with TRIO programs where once they certify themselves as being a recipient or eligible, they're good as long as they're part of the TRIO program. So can we look at something like that as well for verification? If a student stops out or drops out, we may then pick up verification for that student again, but not have that student required to verify he or she is poor 4 years in a row or 2 years in a row, whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah, thank you. We actually have been looking at some things in the, the machine learning model that Ed discussed, presented on this morning. We've looked at, I'm trying to go from memory now, Ed, but we looked at family size, number in college. The machine learning model, we think, is smart enough that year over year that it is going to start to discover some of those kinds of things. And the hope would be that if it's once someone is verified, if it shows a much reduced incidence of improper payments in subsequent years, that might factor into the machine learning model in ways that'll do some of what you're talking about. But we have looked even more overtly at that with family size number in college, for example, that if the family size number in college remains the same as the previous year. There's some problems with that too, if you think about it a little bit. But life happens and family circumstances change over time. But we're looking at things like that. Yeah.
And as a follow-up, with respect to students who once they complete a FAFSA and something does change, or they go from being independent because they're a veteran 1 year and next year they're an orphan of the ward of the court, and you have different elements that may not be picked up by the department. Something like that year over year being examined might be able to help that student have a reduction in improper payment or being able to determine if there's fraudulent behavior. So something where in which even with households, not household size, pardon me, head of household. I mean, that becomes one of our banes as far as us trying to work through some things. So once we discover it's conflicting data, then we have to go back and maybe penalize the student for a number of years because they only got caught in verification 1 year.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mic 3, ma'am.
Yeah, I would like some clarification on the reporting for the foreign gifts and contracts. Specifically 2 scenarios. One, if you have an international student, say from Saudi Arabia, who the government is paying tuition, fees, room and board. And the second scenario is just say a family from Canada who's paying. Does that get counted in the $250,000?
So the way the information collection is currently written, then yes, those sort of things would count in the $250,000, but remember it's from each source. So the student from one country would be counted towards one $250,000 and the student from the other country is towards a different $250,000. So you'd have to have a fair number of students paying tuition from one specific country in order to hit that $250,000 limit on tuition alone.
So you would say all the Canadian students, then that would be one source, and then English students would be one source. So it's $250,000 from the source before you have to, not cumulative. Okay,
correct.
Great. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Mic 2, sir.
Hello, Alan Cowett from Becker College in Massachusetts. I have the same question about the Parent Plus Zone as my colleague from Morehouse. I asked the same question last year as well. I appreciate that the plan is to make it very clear, but if I can be so bold as to quote Misty Parkinson from this morning, our students don't read. So I do have a suggestion for the Plus Zone application. It's very simple. I say it's very simple. I'm not a tech guy. It strikes me that we could use the date of birth. If the student's date of birth is before the parent's date of birth, then there's an obvious error, and it shouldn't accept that application. Similarly, for students who are independent by age, and if parents are applying, if the student's date of birth is before 1996, 1995, whatever it is each year, then the application should also not go through. My biggest concern is that credit checks are being run on everyone, and that strikes me as unethical that credit checks are being run when the loan is never going to be approved. It's also a customer service issue with the school explaining why the loan's not approved. But it strikes me, again, as an easy tech solution. If the student is born in 1969 and the parent is born in 1999, then the application doesn't go through at all.
Yeah. Thank you for those suggestions.
Mic 1, sir.
Dan Sharon, Monroe College. I have some concerns on the Informed Borrower tool. Been talking with a number of my colleagues in the audience, especially for schools that have process on BBAY, and we have 3 full terms. So my school, our 3rd term starts the last week in April, and so half our loans are, April through the following December, and to only have that 2 or 3 week time period to be able to get all our students and all their parents to be able to do this is going to become problematic at our school and in a number of schools. And so I would hope you would consider opening those time periods up, maybe somehow attaching it to the FAFSA cycle, so when you start doing a FAFSA for the next year, you could do it, just because if it's always going to be April every year, this is going to be problematic for many schools in terms of being able to process loans for their students for that spring-summer term that crosses over.
Thank you, and we do understand there's some concern for those April schools, and we are taking back comments and suggestions. As of right now, our plan is to start it in the April for each award year. If we start running into issues, we can figure out a better way to do it. But right now, we think it's important to start with this award year and starting in the April timeframe.
I understand starting with this new award year, but as we go into multiple years, like I said, hopefully there'll be consideration to roll those time frames back, because we have trouble just getting students to do a FAFSA in a timely period. To chase them down in 3 weeks to do this is going to be impossible.
And yes, and we'll collect data along the way just to help us make better decisions if we need to. Thanks.
Mike 2, sir.
With regard to the college scorecard, the presentation of median data as opposed to mean data prevents one from creating national aggregates, plus the fact that most of the data is privacy obscured also prevents one including that in a national aggregate. So I'd like to suggest that you consider adding various national aggregates, maybe disaggregated by type of institution, because that'll be useful for a tool where a student doesn't have a particular college in mind, but knows what major they're interested in and could use that to explore their debt versus income scenarios for that major. The other thing I'd like to mention is that with public service loan forgiveness, I previously made challenges to the public that I had yet to hear from students who were credible, who had satisfied the requirements but were still being denied. Since then, I have heard from many students who I was able to very carefully review, and people who had been continuously employed by the same qualifying employer for not just 10 years, but 20, 30 years, spanning October 1, 2007 to the present, and yet the servicer said they had only made 68 qualifying payments. And when I brought these individuals to the attention of the servicer, some of whom would have made for a very bad news media presence for the servicer, and members of the U.S. military who are being denied forgiveness, they did a secondary review and found that they had, in fact, made the required 120 qualifying payments. So my concern is that the servicer has a problem counting. Students have a problem counting because there are some students applying who have only been in repayment for 6 years and can't possibly have made 120 qualifying payments. But at least a quarter of the students who are applying and getting denied, the servicer is not correctly counting the number of qualifying payments. And this is a problem that, and it's quite clearly apparent now, but it's a problem that's been going on for a while that it has yet to be fixed. So I'm wondering what the department is going to do to ensure that people who are qualified for public service loan forgiveness get the forgiveness for which they're eligible in a timely manner.
Thank you. Although we are continuing to improve the public service loan forgiveness through the help tool and other things, our data doesn't show that 25% are being denied because the payments are miscounted. Our data actually shows that over 80% are being denied because they haven't been in repayment for at least 10 years.
It's 62% according to the data published by the department.
Want to do it?
Hi there. You're right that the data that we post on our data center provides a different statistic than the 80% that Cynthia just quoted. The 80% statistic is different and it is accurate.
Okay, well, I can only go by the data that the department has published, but still and I've had specific individuals, examples that have been denied. It's clear that there are people who are being denied that shouldn't be denied, and that there's a problem that needs to be addressed with the servicer's technology for counting the number of qualifying payments. There's inconsistencies between the ECF forms and the applications for forgiveness, and the only difference there is the number of qualifying payments.
Thank you for the feedback. I do want to speak, though, to Mark's suggestion about the scorecard. As many of you know, we have recently made some major changes to the college scorecard, and we are looking for your feedback about how that might look. So especially Mark's comment about looking at a particular major as opposed to knowing what schools you want to compare, I think that's a really great suggestion. And as we continue to roll out the changes, we will consider other improvements that we can make to it. So I think that's a great suggestion, and it's one that we will definitely look at.
Mic 3, ma'am.
Katie Starling, Kansas State University. This one I think is for Misty. I know at one point when we extended the number of characters in the field for parents' income earned from work, I guess we also expanded the number of fields for tax-deferred contributions to tax-deferred plans. But there is actually a limit to what the IRS will allow a person to contribute to a tax-deferred plan. So when I get ICERs that have over $1 million in that field, it just doesn't make sense. Can we look at what the maximum that the IRS by statute will let two people combined contribute to tax-deferred plans, limit the field length so that they can't inadvertently report $800,000 or $1 million or $3 million? You know, when I talk to the families, they don't know how that happened, but it's cents. They're adding in cents, or I don't know what they're doing. But if we can't limit the field length on that, can we put in an edit that says it looks like this might be wrong? Because since that comes from W-2s, it doesn't, it wouldn't jeopardize the data from the IRS. You know, it's data that they hand entered themselves.
We can certainly look at whether we could do an edit of some kind, but I want Craig to answer your actual
I'd have
issue.
to take it back and look, but just off the face of what you're saying, I think it would be difficult to limit the field size. I don't think it's quite as simple as all that because of catch-up, you know, based on age, and there's some complexity there. But I think the edit suggestion that you're making is one that we could take back and look at least a challenge question, challenge pop-up or something that's challenging the validity of the...
Because those kids are not selected for verification because then their EFC is astronomical.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, and we'll take that back. That's right.
Thank you.
Mic 1, sir.
Peter Hurley, University of Michigan. My questions are my own and don't represent those views of my employer. Craig, by my count, you've got about 40 days left in your career and you've got a basket of stuff to take back to figure out. Who's succeeding you? Or how many people are succeeding you?
Well, well, thank you, Peter. You know, yesterday I didn't get a single question, and I thought you guys were just being extra nice and were going to let me kind of coast out of here. But today you've woken me up to the reality of that. But no, thanks. It's very kind. I'll let my colleague Cynthia speak to. We've been, you know, Jeff Appel was well aware of my impending retirement quite some time ago, and we've been working on transition plans. I'm not sure that I'm sure we're not prepared to announce most of that publicly today. But I will say this, and then I'll turn it over to Cynthia. I have never felt more confident in the young people on the team that we have assembled today. And, you know, there's a time in most of our lives, but in my life in particular, when it's pretty clear that the time is right to hand the baton off to the next generation. And most of them are sitting right here. I couldn't be prouder of the people that are going to be be at PLI and in FSA after I leave the stage. So, but I'll turn it over to Cynthia.
Yeah, Craig, I couldn't have said it better. I like to joke that I actually do live in Lake Wobegon because my staff are 100% above average. They are all absolutely wonderful, and we are working on transition plans, but the issues will be well taken care of with the expertise on our team.
At a regional meeting, it was suggested to us that the multi-year functionality of the master promissory note was going away, and I'm wondering if the individual borrower confirmation supplants the need to do that.
There are no plans to make that go away. The informed borrower tool is a way for us to make sure the borrower is aware of what they're borrowing and what their repayment looks like in the future. So it's to inform the borrower on an annual basis without changing the master promissory note.
Thank you.
Mic 2, ma'am.
My name is Lissa Wayne from New York Film Academy. As the college scorecard goes through developmental phases, have there been any considerations for allowing schools to add free-form text describing some of the reported data, similar to what was available in the gainful employment disclosures?
It is something we've talked about, and I think we need to consider it further. It seems something that we've been hearing more and more that people would like to do that. There are, of course, some concerns with having institutions then go on to a system where they can make the same adjustments that they might want to make on their own website. We're trying to make it as consistent as we can among institutions. And so I think the initial concern is that we might have someone who adjusts it at their institution and somebody else who does not adjust it. And we're trying to get people to, for lack of a better words, compare apples to apples. Now, we all know that's very difficult to do. We know institutions that students are considering are not all the same. They may not be of the same type. They may not be looking at the same program at each one. So we're continuing to have those discussions, and we've not come to any decision at this point. So it is something that you could see in the future.
It's being apples to apples. It's difficult to do with the earnings data because of the data collected. So thank you.
Question on endorsers with the informed borrowing tool. Are endorsers going to be required to use that as part of the parent plus loan process if it's denied and required to do that? And if so, is it for every loan that they endorse on an award year basis, or if or how that's going to work?
Endorsers are not going to be required to use it.
Okay, thank you.
Mic 2, sir.
Hi there, thank you. Going back to a question that my colleague Robert Muhammad asked earlier about the machine learning algorithm, just a suggestion to take back, and maybe you're already thinking about this, in an environment where you're going to have multiple years of data, could it be possible to have a tolerance level on EFC, where if the EFC from year 1 to year 2 doesn't vary more than a certain percentage, that again, you would opt not to select that student for verification, keeping in mind that there may be changes in formula and tables, but that's a reasonable expectation of consistency for the family.
Yeah, thanks. Ed, do you want to speak to that a little bit? I mean, quite honestly, what he's suggesting is, I think, in essence, what the machine learning model is doing in part when we talk about reducing improper payments or at least being more efficient in identifying them.
Yeah, sure, I can speak to that. Yeah, I do think that the machine learning model year over year, because the model gets smarter year over year, that it will build exactly that sort of thing into it. So that if EFC doesn't change that much year over year, that will make it less likely that that filer is chosen for verification in upcoming years. It's just that we've just finished the first year and just started the second year of that new model. So you probably haven't seen it quite yet, but it should be coming.
And again, from a target perspective, I know this morning the number, I think you had talked about 22, 23%. Is that sort of your ultimate goal as the machine gets smarter, is being smarter about that 22%, or do you think we'll see a reduced average over time as well?
As the model gets smarter, we hope to be able to reduce that number even further. So 22% is where we're at, but we don't plan to stop there.
Thank you.
Can I
Appreciate
just
it.
add about the 22%? I mean, quite honestly, the thing that I'm most excited about the machine learning models, I don't think that there is going to be a predetermined percentage like that at all. What we're really finding is that there's an optimum efficiency where we get the best return on the dollar for your efforts and our efforts, and that percentage will fall wherever that percentage falls. So I don't think we'd want to limit ourselves necessarily to 22. Could be lower, as Ed said.
Mic 3, ma'am.
Hi. This is more of a suggestion or a way to improve part of the verification process. So very often we have parents that are married and they file head of household. So this is obviously potentially discrepant information, and it seems like a high rate of these students are being selected for verification. So we have to resolve that. So what I'm suggesting or wondering, is there a way to put like some pop-up that when they write that they're head of household or they're married, that you will say to them that, hey, this could potentially be the wrong filing status for you, or you may have to amend your tax return if you don't fit this certain criteria for the IRS. Because it just seems like we're becoming the IRS. We're just constantly making them amend, and it's just a very big burden.
So I think you have two different issues there. One is us popping up some sort of an alert, and the other is what the messaging is. The alert is there, so we are actually letting them know when we believe that there is a conflict between the marital status that they've reported and the tax filing status. Keeping in mind that marital status is as of today and tax filing status is as of a much longer, period of time. So we don't do any sort of hard stops or anything like that. Our language is focused on drawing it to their attention and, trying to get them to take another look at whether they've reported it properly. So the edit is already there. So you're suggesting that within the text of that edit, we're specifically saying that if you insist on continuing in this way, that your FAA is going to have a little chat with you.
Exactly. Just something a little bit harder, more details, so that they understand when we approach them, this isn't the first time they've heard it.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could definitely consider. I do think that this could potentially be one of those issues where, I think the room is too cold, I think the room is too hot. You probably have some people with a difference of opinion, and I think we would want to make sure that we had an opportunity to hear other FAAs, because we don't want to be driving people to the FAAs or sending them there with some ideas, I guess, about, what to expect. We want to make sure that we get feedback about whether that is an appropriate message and perhaps how to properly word it. We do have an advisory group that we consult with on a regular basis, and that's something that we can take and get some feedback and see if that's something that we might want to tackle.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank
the
you.
attention on that.
Mic 1, ma'am.
Aisha Ishtiyaq, Northern Virginia Community College, and perfect timing from the last comment question. From my perspective, verifying the tax filing status is a IRS responsibility that IRS has yet to take ownership of, that has been dumped on the Department of Education and consequently the schools. And if we are to talk about 21st century FSA student model, which I'm hearing since the last conference that's where we are moving towards. I think this is one area where the IRS, this is one area that needs to be the area of focus, and IRS needs to step up their game. Thank you.
Mic 2, sir.
About 12% of dependent students have a parent marital status of divorced. And some number of these, probably a very large number, involve payment of alimony. And as you're aware, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 changed the tax treatment of alimony starting this year from being reported as part of AGI of the recipient to being reported as part of AGI of the payer, which means that custodial parents are going to have significantly lower AGI for the most part, and that this potentially affects as many as 1 million applicants and could have an impact, if there are no changes, of increasing the Pell Grant eligibility of these applicants by hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. So I'm wondering what the department and maybe Congress are going to do about that.
Well, obviously, I'm not going to speak to what Congress is going to do about it, but we have had conversations about it. In fact, Misty and I were just talking. I just don't remember if we've ever come to final resolution about that. Kira, do you remember this conversation about alimony? I think we've got that suggestion submitted during the 60-day comment period of the FAFSA, didn't we? When did I hear this before?
It came from Mark,
Or-
and
okay.
yeah, we've talked about it. Sorry, we have a whole team that meets like every other week, and this was a topic. So the people who are tracking the issues and the resolution are not here at the conference, but
Right.
we can certainly go back and see where that issue stands, whether we reached some sort of resolution that we just can't recall,
Yeah.
or if it's something that we were still in the
That's
process of
outstanding.
discussing.
I just can't remember right at the moment, but sorry.
And a quick request is that when you print addresses that students or parents are to send, say, signature pages into, that you add the 3 letters USA at the end of the address, because the mailing address for certain documents is London, Kentucky, not London in the UK. And I've had a couple of examples of parents who've gotten confused, and especially when they're living overseas, and sent it to the UK, and it comes back after a few months as undeliverable. So, I mean, adding those 3 little letters might do a lot of good, and it won't take up very much space on the forms.
Thank you.
Mic 3, ma'am.
Katie Starling. This one, I don't know if it's a broad ranging issue, but I stood and watched it myself. We don't typically fill out FAFSAs for students on FA Access. We have workstations and we'll direct them and have them sit and fill it out themselves and be there to answer questions. But I had a student whose parent had an ITIN number, did file taxes in the United States, didn't have a social security number. They could not get past a hard stop that would not let them answer that the parent didn't have a social security number but was a tax filer. And I stood there and couldn't get past it either, and we finally resolved it by sitting down and opening up FA Access and actually filling out the FAFSA for the student where we could say, yes, this is true. Is that something new, or?
So this is an issue that is very perplexing to me, because I don't think there's been a single conference where I haven't sat up here and heard somebody report that that is an issue, and yet nobody's ever been able to give us an example of it. We've never been able to recreate it ourselves, and we try every single time. So when you put in, you said all zeros, right, for the SSN? Yeah, you put in all zeros for the SSN. We have an edit that pops up if you say that you reported that you filed a 1040. That is just a confirmation edit. All you have to do, if the information is correct, is confirm it. If 2 parents are reported and both of them have all zeros, it looks like the edit hits more than once, but it's really hitting like once for each parent. So you should never see more than 2 edit screens before being able to continue and submit. I'm perplexed as to why we keep getting these reports, but nobody can ever recreate this issue or show us or give us like identifiers that we could do some research or anything like that. So I'm begging you.
I could probably find it, because since
Please
we
do.
never fill out applications on
Please do.
FA Access, we got a brand new file type in that our person who loads in the files was like, what the hell is this? You know, and it almost didn't get picked up, you know, because it was just a really weird one-off. So I could probably find him.
Yeah, because we do have the ability. If you encounter that again, where you see somebody with that scenario, I'm looking over here for some help. But we have the ability to actually like observe, I think, in the background, like what's happening if the edit is, or if the issue is occurring because of maybe some other combination of information that's on the form or something. Nobody's looking at me because they think I'm not talking to them. Hi, over here. Okay, yeah, so I'm right? The debug thing? Yes. So if that ever happens again, what we need to do is like connect you and then try to figure out what the issue is. And if we can figure it out and solve for it, then none of you all will need to report this to me again next year, and it will be a really nice conference to not hear about this issue. But if you could just, let us know if you have identifiers for that particular scenario or another scenario like it, or you must have my contact information. Reach out to me if you ever see it happen again, so that we can try to, look behind the scenes and see what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mic 1, sir.
Yes, Robert Muhammad, Winston State University. Once again, I'm going to preface my comment or my question by saying it may already exist in some fashion, but is there some tool or some way we can develop something that would allow schools of like types, such as HBCUs, PBIs, small cash-strapped privates, whatever the case may be, being able to see relatable data as it may be related to that type of institution? Because sometimes we're lumped into being 4 years, 2 years privates, but there's some very specific challenges or opportunities to subsets of organizations.
Can you clarify what specific data that you're looking for? Are you talking, I mean, things like cohort default rates? Are you talking iPads data, scorecard, or overall everything?
Overall everything, in some way in which to parse that data out to see if there's some specific trends that may be emerging with respect to cohort default rates, with respect to whatever it might be, so we can maybe see how some institutions have some of the same challenges that can address those institutions' needs more holistically versus, again, being lumped as a 4-year school or 4-year private. I think it even goes back to the conversation about verification rates. Or, you know, some schools have a higher verification rate. We don't necessarily know why, but I do think in the past it's been demonstrated that HBCUs or PBIs may have a higher verification rate than some other institutions, maybe based on student type.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. I think I see the people in this row that are taking that down, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mic 2, ma'am.
Hi, Debbie Yeager again. I know that the various departments in the federal government do not talk to each other. And this is evident because if a person becomes a naturalized U.S. citizen, the Social Security Office cannot verify that they are now U.S. citizens. Oh, I understand that people don't understand it, the students don't, the parents don't. However, what I don't understand is if a student receives a C comment because of that 1 year, submits the document, the following year they have the same issue. Why can't a financial aid officer, whoever is requesting the money and verifying or confirming that everything has been resolved, put a notation, yes, document's been submitted, because it's very rare that the U.S. government revokes citizenship. So if you are a citizen this year, most probably next year you'll be a citizen again. Okay. I'm not going anywhere. You know, I'm stuck here. The flight goes out at midnight or sometime.
Well, we're just conferring here. We think it's a timing issue, and that we don't carry forward or store an unsuccessful match, only the successful match. So it's a matter of the data confirmation catching up. And I honestly don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if anybody in the front row knows what the typical timeline is. Oh, here comes our subject matter expert here.
Hi. I think you may have asked this question last year as well.
Most probably I did.
Yeah. So once you collect a naturalized individual is a U.S. citizen, and once you collect the certificate of naturalization, if the individual fails the automated match, then in the subsequent award year, you don't have to collect the certificate of naturalization again. That may be an issue where the student would have to contact the Social Security Administration, and it just makes.
Well, the stuff is in the folder. I'm not worried about that. I'm just interested in knowing why there's a C comment.
Well, in that case,
it's been confirmed. We have confirmed it. We have the document. Let's check it off and move on in life.
Well, that's what you do. You check it off and move.
Yeah, but it happens the next year,
but
and if a student is there for 4 years, it's going to happen for 4 years.
Then that would be a case where the student should contact the Social Security Administration and have their information updated with the Social Security Administration.
So you're expecting the student to go to the Social Security
That's the guidance
office.
in the handbook that the student would be required to.
That's going to be fun. All right, well,
thank you so much.
Anyway. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I would also like to piggyback onto that and just mention that we actually do have some really good relationships with other agencies, and we actually are talking, and they're talking back. So I know you were joking, but I just did want to confirm that we really work hard at those relationships.
Obviously you are, because I remember the days we didn't have data retrieval tool. So I am very happy about that, but I was joking. I was joking.
Thank you.
Mic 3, sir.
Hi, on the college scorecard, sorry, Mike Rogovin, Community College of Rhode Island. On the college scorecard, has there been any thought to adding some extra data fields for the two-year schools? Because when you look at the elements that are on there, graduation rate, retention rate, salary, etc., we pale in comparison. But for a student right out of high school who's considering their options, for those who are undecided and may not know, that might be a good starting place. So could we put in elements such as, the schools that the students transfer to, or with then links so they could see what the numbers are at those institutions that they travel to and how they perform there?
It is not something that I know has been discussed. That's not to say it hasn't. Those who are working on the scorecard more directly may have done that, but we'll certainly make a note of that so we can discuss that as a potential for enhancement.
Thank you.
Mic 1, sir.
Yes, my name is Aaron Statz. I'm from West Virginia University. My question deals with drug convictions. In Volume 2, it says that a school must provide to every student upon enrollment a separate, clear, and conspicuous written notice for information on penalties associated with drug-related convictions. We know that if a student self-identifies, that it creates a comment code, and we have the paperwork for that. Our question is, we notify through our consumer information, which we send out once a year, to students that we have consumer information with the clear report and everything else. Does that meet the standard, or do we, like one of our sister Big 12 schools, have to send out a separate email notifying students what the ramifications of a drug conviction is?
Look at the time. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was awesome.
Oh, I get it. I get it. No, go ahead. Greg.
I thought I was going to pitch a no-hitter here for a while. Apparently, that won't happen. No, it would be acceptable. The one disclosure you send out every year, you wouldn't be required to go ahead with the other individual disclosures.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mic 2, ma'am.
Hi, Sandy Sarge. To the question that the gentleman just asked about disaggregating different information into smaller groups, has there been any consideration about identifying students who receive both Title IV benefits as well as VA benefits, and looking at if there's any differences in cohort default rates or anything like that, being able to identify that kind of information?
Yeah, we're actually, yes, there has been. We've been having discussions with the VA. We are working with the VA because they want a whole bunch of data on their students who are both Title IV recipients and VA benefit recipients. And I'm not sure which one of our two agencies are going to publish it or both, but we are absolutely working on that.
Yay, thank you.
Mic 3, sir.
Tyler Bergmeyer, Dartmouth College. I'm wondering if you can clarify for us on the acceptable documentation slide from the general session this morning. First bullet says you may request a tax return transcript. Second bullet says a signed copy of the tax return is also acceptable. And then the third slide says you may not require a tax return transcript in lieu of a signed tax return unless you question the validity. So it's kind of like, can you clarify that?
Yes, what we were trying to communicate, we had some questions from institutions asking, can they require a tax transcript and not accept a paper tax return? And we issued guidance, you'll recall, shortly after this conference last year to give you the latitude of taking the paper tax return, which is actually in the regulatory, in the regs, that the tax return, the paper tax return is the acceptable documentation of income. So we don't believe that it's allowable for an institution to exclusively require a tax return transcript. You cannot do that. However, you can request a tax return transcript, And you can require a tax return transcript in those instances where you have reason to question the submission of a paper tax return.
The rest of the slide kind of makes it sound like you can only request a tax return transcript after a tax return has been received if you question the validity.
Yeah, I would blame the author of that slide, which is yours truly. So I probably didn't write it very clear, but that's not what we meant to say. You may request, for example, and you're missing information. I don't know how you request verification documents from your students, but if you want a list, you need to submit a family size and whatever you're asking for, and you can put in that list a tax return transcript. However, if the student were to come into your office and say, here's my paper tax return, you can't say, no, we don't accept the paper tax return. You can only submit the tax return transcript. You cannot do that.
Great. Thank you.
Mic 1, sir.
You remember financial aid, pedantic rant, mean old man, FAA. See, I almost said Future Farmers of America.
Thank you.
Greg got that one. Seriously, this is one of those, the room's too hot, room's too cold. It concerns aggregate codes, SAR codes that I get off of the FAFSAs. It seems like I'm reviewing an awful lot of graduate students who are over their dependent limits way back when. I mean, for an example, I just did one where I had to review somebody that, had, and I figured it out. They had a plus denial from 19 years ago. 19 years ago, if you were working in finance, and that put them over the dependent level, and it actually flagged them saying, well, they're 4,000 over, and I figured, well, it probably wasn't reported right. A financial aid administrator, like myself, just wrote it in a folder, put it in the folder, and said there was a plus denial. NSLDS wasn't aware of it. But even those, I'm going through stuff that you could clearly see in NSLDS, the history, they had a plus denial, additional unsub. It keeps me gainfully employed. I always hear that artificial intelligence is going to get me out of a job, so I'm happy. But on the one hand, I'm seeing that, the room's too cold. But on the other hand, I've noticed like an unintended consequence of the early FAFSA is you get people doing their FAFSAs way before the second disbursement. And when this first happened with the early FAFSA, it kind of blindsided me. Now I've put little things in place where I kind of figure out myself, hey, how can we, look and anticipate, this graduate student that's within 20,000 of 138,000. So I was wondering, like, room too hot, room too cold. Can we tweak down the other side? And, do we have to keep reviewing those things? Although it keeps me employed, and, I seem like an intelligent guy in the office because I instruct the office, but they are over their dependent limits as an undergraduate. And then on the flip side, if there's something there just saying, really this person really is getting near their aggregate limit, ahead of time, just some thoughts for you guys. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We've gotten a couple of aggregate questions this conference, and I think the team and I will go back and take a look at some of the calculations to see if we should tweak them a little bit.
Mic 2, ma'am.
Hi, Kathy Medina from Chabot College in Hayward, California. Recently I had a parent call me and kind of just jump in on me because her son had been selected for verification 3 years in a row, and we were picking on him and discriminatory, and I tried to explain how verification selection works and all that, and she didn't take it, and so I gave her the 800 number and had her call Department of Ed. Well, she did, and she called me right back and said, I told you. The customer service rep told her that the schools select students for verification. So I said, anyway, she ended up hanging up on me. She was going to file a grievance and a complaint, and I haven't heard yet. But I called the Department of Ed number and talked to a young lady, and she said, oh yeah, we always tell students that the schools select you for verification. And I said, students are selected V1, V5, V6, whatever, and she says, well, I don't know what V1 is, but we tell the students and their family that the school selects the students for verification. I asked to speak to a supervisor. She put me on hold for about 10 minutes. I ended up speaking to another person, same level. She too told me that the schools select the students for verification. Again, asked for a supervisor, never got anywhere, they hung up on me. How do you explain that, and how do we remedy this? Because we don't select the students for verification. They are selected, it's on their STAR. I mean, am I wrong, guys?
Right.
So how can somebody...
So I appreciate you sharing that. That's not something that I had heard before, and I will absolutely take that back and address that with our call center.
I know that I called the San Francisco office, and she said she escalated it, but I haven't heard, and I'll find out where they escalated that to.
I just want to confirm that the number that you're calling is 1-800-4FED-AID?
Yes, it's the 8-4. Yeah, I don't have the number memorized.
Okay.
Yes, it's the student number.
Yes, I will take care of that.
Thank
you.
Mic 3, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon. Our question is regarding 400 and 401 comment codes. We know they're supposed to be reviewed, and because of the volume of those we receive in our office and our staff, we select them for verification. So we require, tax return, transcript, et cetera. But the verification yesterday said we can't ask for the tax return if the IRS data retrieval was used. Well, the 400 and 401, the IRS data retrieval was used. So what do you suggest? Can we waive that part if we have it in our policy that that's what we require? Are we covered? What do you suggest?
Well, first of all, 400, 401 is my bane, but we purposely went that way with masking when we had to mask the results coming over from the IRS data retrieval tool, and there were some things that just didn't make sense that we used to could challenge during the FAFSA session that now we can't challenge because it would divulge private information. So, but we did not want to do what you've voluntarily taken on yourself to do by selecting them all for verification. In fact, quite the contrary, that would have been the easy thing to do. We could have just done exactly that. We did not want to add to your burden in that regard. We just wanted you to look at this one narrow kind of thing. So you don't have to select, you can trust the IRS data retrieval tool information, of course, and you don't need the tax return to verify. If you want to talk afterwards, maybe we can walk through some of that. It's been a while since I've looked at 400, 401, but we were trying to avoid having you make all of those verifications.
Okay.
That's what we were
Thank you. I'll hang around.
And I just want to clarify, I do not believe that we set the 400 or 401 code if the IRS data retrieval tool was used for like all of the fields that are in question. And so if you're seeing that comment code, it's likely a combination of data that came from the IRS and data that didn't. So to validate what Craig said, anything that came from the IRS, we know that that's good. It's the other stuff. You need to look at that in comparison to the IRS and see where the problem may be.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions. Mike 1.
I was hoping to save the best for last, but that's okay. We've had several comments today as it relates to the filing status. With prior, what we're finding institutionally that students are not able to enroll if their parents do not amend their tax returns. So it's really, really significantly impacting students' enrollment if parents are not filing correctly and do not agree to amend their tax returns. Is it possible to eliminate the filing status as a part of the verification process?
It's actually not part of the verification process. It's part of the conflicting information. It's one of the 3 things. We say over and over, we don't expect you to be tax experts, but one of the 3 things that we do expect you to do is to identify people that have filed under the incorrect filing status. We certainly never intended. I'd have to think about it a little more. We can maybe talk afterwards, but. It's troubling to me that a parent's unwillingness to correct a filing status that's clearly incorrect is preventing somebody from going to college. That was never the intent.
It is.
So it's the first time I've ever actually heard that exact scenario, so
yes.
I'd have to think about it a little more.
Thank you.
Okay, last question, Mike 2.
Hello, Jason Hibbert from East Oregon University, a public 4-year.
I apologize if this is a duplicate question. I came in after an overlapping session. I heard a little bit that sounded might be similar. But I have 2 points that I'd like to bring up for application processing that I hope could be adjusted to work more smoothly. Students from the freely associated states have parents who do not file taxes. Many of those parents nevertheless have income over our IRS filing requirements. When these students answer question 80 on the 2019-20 FAFSA that their parents will not file, but then report income over IRS filing requirements, CPS generates reject code 20 on their ICERs. We know that their parents pay taxes, but simply do not file a return like is done in the United States. So it is understandable that they answer the questions this way. Alternatively, if students answer that their questions file the tax return on their FAFSA and choose the fourth option in question 81 for the freely associated states, but put in all zeros for their parents' social security numbers, the ICER returns with reject codes J and or K. These Micronesian students are caught in the middle with rejected FAFSAs in either case that need to be manually confirmed by a financial aid administrator in order to successfully calculate an EFC. They don't technically file a return, and they don't typically have U.S. Social Security numbers. They don't fit in the box. I suggest that because option 3, foreign return, does not check for Social Security numbers, that the language on the FAFSA be changed to list the freely associated states under that third option instead of the fourth, and that some additional help text be added to the have your parents completed a tax return question that will direct students from the freely associated states to indicate yes, so that they can they can take the benefit provided in the EFSA formula for taxes paid. There also appears to be a hole in the citizenship check for eligibility where a Micronesian student can enter a 666 number properly, mistakenly indicate they are a U.S. national, and then get a successfully processed ICER without the typical 142 or 146C code. Because the system knows that a 666 number is not a valid Social Security number, data matching with the Social Security Administration doesn't happen. Because the student answered as a U.S. national, a DHS match is not conducted. We have to manually filter out these students and follow up with them to make corrections. Absent that, Banner will automatically package these Micronesian students with federal direct loans for which they are not eligible. I suggest that the FAFSA application throw an error to have the student confirm or correct what appears to be incorrect information when entering a 666 number. Thank you.
Hey, don't leave. So I just, first of all, I'm so glad that the last question was an easy one. You have gotten that all written out, and I would like you to email that to me because I got to tell you, my brain is fried right now, and I couldn't track on all of it. One of the things I do remember, we have talked about this. I know some of this, and this is like a type 1, type 2 error, and the fix to some of what you were talking about creates a more serious problem in an edit on the other side. It's kind of complex. I can't remember all the details yet, but if you would email that, if you would not mind, emailing that entire testimony that you read there, which was excellent, by the way. I'm not making fun of it. It was very good. We'll take that back, and we've got people that we've talked about some of what you talked about, but I got to tell you, I didn't track on all of it. So.
Yeah, if you could email it to both Craig and I was going to attempt to address like the first couple of points, and then I was losing the rest of what you were saying, and so I don't want to try to partially address it. So between the two of us, we should be able to address.
You packed a lot in that.
You did. I don't think that was 2 points. I think that was
there
about 12.
There was about 12
and
points,
I know I lost about 8 of them.
Yeah.
So
well thought through.
Yes.
I can tell you've been thinking about it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, please give our panel members a round of applause. Thank you so much for your questions, comments, and recommendations, and enjoy the rest of your day.